All right, so welcome to the event. This was advertised on Facebook as White Colleagues, What Can You Do? This was in response to a call to action to our white colleagues who are working in student affairs and higher education. So basically, I am your host. My name is Ariel Davis. I have two co-hosts, Margy and Tyler. If you guys could say hi and let everybody know you're there, you're present, you're with us.
Hi, my name is Margy Frazier, and I am in student life at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Tyler, are you muted?
I was. So hi, I'm Tyler Miller. I am the Director of Residential Community Life at SUNY Oneonta. So we are very grateful to be here to join all of you.
Awesome. And so I'm Ariel Davis. If you haven't gathered as of yet, I'm a Black woman. So this is a little near and dear to my heart in terms of not only the internal turmoil that I've had, but in addition to that, I want to be able to do the labor that I can do. This is kind of part of my ministry in terms of being able to talk to people about what's going on and give you the real life lived experience perspective of the ways that you can help and the ways that you can stop doing harm. So I want to give a disclaimer. I'm very Christian, but I did not invite my pastor to this presentation for very good reason. I am an academic. I'm a coordinator of outreach. I'm a doctoral student, but I curse. So I just want to let you know, I curse a lot. In addition to cursing, I want to let you know that this particular presentation is not set up for me to coddle white feelings. This is not for me to wipe your tears. This is not for me to pat you and say they're there. This is for me to tell you that Black people are fighting for their lives every day, and how can you help? So this is the kind of conversation that I'd have with a relative, that I'd have with a friend, because I feel like if I'm not being real with you, why am I being with you at all? You know what I mean? So I have the participants muted, and you guys can actually put questions into the chat box. And so throughout the presentation, Margy and Tyler are going to be reviewing that. But for the most part, the question and answer session will be at the end. And I realized that we did start 15 minutes later. I physically had to, leave my house, go to my job. I'm kind of here illegally, so don't tell anybody. But I realized we started a little bit later, and I promised you an hour and a half. So I really want to make sure that you get that hour and a half. Now, if you have to leave, you have other obligations, it's late, I completely get it. But I really want to try to answer all your questions if that does pop up for you during the course of this presentation, or even after. If you think of something a week later, I still want you to be able to reach out and contact me. So before we get started, any questions, anything you guys want to throw into the comment box? I have a little Prezi set up, and I'm a Prezi novice, so please forgive me if it looks kind of crazy, but I want to get this started for you guys. So any questions, anything else that I should do, let me know. Everybody's good? Okay, cool. All right, so Prezi is set up. Let me share my screen. All right. So the title of the presentation is White Colleagues, What Can You Do? This was the picture that I picked as the backdrop for the Facebook event. And I will say that the photojournalism during this uprising is some of the most beautiful artistry I've ever seen. These pictures are just so captivating and so representative, and they mean a lot. This particular photograph is so meaningful to me because if you were able to see the fully uncropped picture, this Black young lady is in front of the crowd. So there's a crowd of protesters behind her. She actually went forward. She's right in the cop's face. And she's probably 110 pounds soaking wet on a good day. But she still said, I'm putting my body on the line and I'm protecting these people behind me is symbolic, because that's literally what we do. That's what Black women do, exactly that. So this is going to kind of be broken down, and let me go to my next slide. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. Come on, Prezi, cooperate with me. There you go. All right, so we've already introduced ourselves, but just, one more time for anybody who might have joined a little later. I'm Ariel Davis. So I'm kind of the main host, the main presenter. And then Margy and Tyler, if you guys can introduce yourself one more time.
Yep, so my name is Margy, and I am the Associate Director of Student Life at Viterbo University in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
And I'm Tyler Miller. I'm Director of Residential Life at SUNY Oneonta. You can see my 6 daughters and my wife in my little picture there. They're my pride and joy. Beautiful.
All right, so our kind of table of contents is the history. So how did we get here? The now, where are we today? And then the call of action is going to be at the end. So let me get started on the history. And I just want to let you guys know there's already something missing. So I met earlier today with the moderators, with Margy and Tyler, and I kind of operated under the assumption everyone knew about the horrors of slavery. I felt like that was kind of a given. Everybody knows about that. But at the same time, I have to remember, not everybody had the same educational offerings. Not everybody was given the real, actual truth. Sometimes people were given a sanitized version of the truth, or even no truth at all. Like literally there's textbooks that just say Black people immigrated here to work. They don't talk about it being against anybody's will. They don't talk about the savagery, the Middle Passage, or any of that. So I wanted to let you know that in the course of slavery from, roughly 1619 to about 1865, African natives were taken from their homeland against their will. And I don't think people realize, but a lot of Africans died just in the Middle Passage. So before they ever got here to be, beaten, maimed, hung, whatever, just the trip alone crossing the Atlantic, that in itself was the cause of death for hundreds of thousands. So I was fortunate enough in February, before everything started getting crazy, to go to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. And that place is superb. It is 5 stories of just nonstop, breathtaking history. And they have a story purely dedicated just to slavery. That whole floor, the only thing that floor has is artifacts and information about slavery. So in terms of the slave catchers, they actually made money from their insurance claims by throwing slaves overboard. So sometimes they said, I don't even want to get them all the way to the auction block. I'm gonna just go ahead and throw them overboard because I'm gonna get $30 or $60 or whatever for them anyway. So some people, while they were chained, were thrown overboard. Then you have people who died of sickness, being in close contact, being in their own filth, just all sorts of different things that happen. So roughly, depending on the voyage, only about half of the people they put in the ship actually made it here. Once they got here, the savagery was just unparalleled, in the sense that this is a little bit of kind of my personal history to help people understand just how recent and just how traumatic slavery actually is. So I reside in California, but I'm originally from Louisiana. And so in Louisiana, I'm from a very rural community, almost exclusively Black, population super, super small, maybe about 350 people. My high school was super, super small. We would graduate classes of maybe like 20 people, like really, really tiny. And so my parents attended my high school before me, and they did not desegregate that high school, as in actually mix Black and white students, until the 80s. So a lot of people think like, oh, all the high schools were desegregated during the Civil Rights Act. No, wrong. And while I was a high school student, and as far as I know, they actually have separate a black prom and a white prom. They have a separate black homecoming queen, a separate white homecoming queen. And so the plantations where my ancestors were enslaved, the fields that they worked, are across the street from where my family lives. And so my family last names are the same as their family last names, and we're actually related because slave masters really like dipping into the slave quarters. That's why I look like this. Hello. So we have a very interconnected history that they do not acknowledge. So the white people who live across the tracks, they are still living in the plantation homes. They reside in those homes today. They fly Confederate flags in the yard today. So that is not that far away. And I want to bring up not only Nathaniel Turner, but I also want to talk about Harriet Tubman in the sense of when they finally got fed up and said, we're just going to burn and shoot and loot, that was considered not only an act of defiance, that was illegal. There were bounties on their head for that. So the Nat Turner Rebellion, there's different stories as to why it came about, but basically he was tired of being enslaved. He was tired of the way he was treated. He was tired of the way his wife was being treated. So he basically went on a rampage for a couple of days, and he took out his masters and some of the local masters of other plantations nearby. They hunted him down and they finally caught him. But at the same time, it was his way of saying, I want to be free from this bondage. Harriet Tubman, there's a lot more to her story than just the Underground Railroad, and I could talk about her all day. But in her case, she felt like liberating her people physically, actually physically taking them off of the plantation and getting them up north into Canada. That was her ministry. That's what she was trying to do. And in terms of slave catchers and slave patrols, oh, they hated that woman. They were looking for that woman. She was the person, like the one person in the world where they were like, if we can get rid of anybody, we're going to get rid of her. So I really hope that she gets to be, was it the $10 or the $20 bill? I know one of them she was supposed to be on before that dotard got elected. But I really want her to be on the bill because she's money. She's money for life. So that's slavery. After slavery, a lot of people think, all right, it was cool. Everybody's equal now. No. Jim Crow, and not just Jim Crow, but other laws, other policies, other ways of discriminating, they persisted and they still persist. So of this collage that I put together, this first picture is a picture of the Greenwood area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so Sunday, June the 1st, was actually the 99th anniversary of the Tulsa race riots. And so I never saw this in a history book. I don't even know of anybody who ever saw this in a history book. But basically, there were African Americans, you know, a lot of them were one generation removed from slavery. If they were older, they might have actually been slaves themselves. And they started a settlement in a specific area of Tulsa where they had their own banks, they had their own doctors, their own movie theaters, anything you could think of that a town would have, they had it. And they were very prosperous, they were doing well, and everything was working out well. There was a false accusation that a young man from the Greenwood area sexually assaulted a white woman in an elevator. And because of that, the police and the Ku Klux Klan, who were the same thing, basically went over to the Greenwood area and just started bombing them, burning their houses down, chasing them out, lynching them, killing them in the streets. So several Black lives were lost that day. And of the ones that weren't lost, that fled, they never came back. This area of Tulsa was burned to the ground. And a lot of those people never returned, and they never tried to start up that society for Black people again because they felt like this would be their fate. So this is also known as the Black Wall Street bombing. It goes by a lot of different names, but basically the Tulsa race riot. And sadly, Tulsa was not the only place that this happened. So similar things happened in Detroit, Chicago, a couple of areas of Florida. So just understand Philadelphia. So understand that whenever Black people tried to create a space in a society for themselves, they were met with violence, and they were met with fatal violence. for having the audacity to think that they could have something of their own. All right, the next picture is Emmett Till. And so Emmett Till is another figure that I didn't know about, was not in history books. I didn't learn about him until I was an adult. But Emmett Till was his mother's only child. They were living in Mississippi, I want to say in like I think it was the 50s. And his mom said, you know, Mississippi is really racist, it's terrible down here. Let's move to Chicago, let's move north. So the common assumption is that Black people were safer in northern cities. And there's a couple of cities in the north, like Boston, that say, hold my beer. So some cities are in the north and they are not and were not friendly to Black people. So I want you to understand that. So even Chicago itself, even Canada, which some people went all the way to Canada, they were still unkind. So Emmett Till he was, I want to say about 15 years old. He was falsely accused of whistling at a white woman, just whistling. And because of that false accusation, that woman's, I think it was her brother and her cousin, they hunted him down and they beat him beyond recognition. And so at the African American History Museum that I talked about, they have an exhibit specifically donated by the Emmett Till Foundation. And it contains his casket, it contains video footage from the funeral, it contains photographs of his mom, and just the level of grief that she was at. I can't explain what her face looked like. I can't explain to you like the deep, searing, just from the pits of hell, just how awful she felt knowing that her only child was gone, like that was it. And so she actually consulted with MLK and other civil rights leaders of the time, and she held a public funeral. She held it open casket, and the mortuary basically told her his face is beaten so far beyond repair, there's nothing we can do. So I won't show you the picture of what his face looked like in that open casket, but I promise you it was horrific. And so the funeral, because it was public, there were civil rights leaders and just Black people in general who came from all around the country. The line just to come into the funeral was actually wrapped around 2 blocks. So this was one way that the civil rights movement started. He was basically a martyr in the sense that his death made a lot of people think. They basically made them think children aren't safe, we aren't safe in the North, we aren't safe in the South. And the irony is that the white woman who falsely accused him of whistling is still alive. And she admitted it was a lie, and she has never been prosecuted, and the police have never come after her. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's her nephew is the governor of Mississippi or something like that. So basically she's untouchable. She's fully admitted that she lied and nothing is gonna happen to her. Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Hold on. All right, so then we have Rodney King. And so when Rodney King was beaten and when everything came out, I didn't live in Southern California yet, but I could definitely tell that tensions were high, that there was a lot going on. Even though I was only 8 years old, I could still sense that something about this situation was not right. So this is, as far as we know, one of the first times that we saw the police brutalizing a Black man on film. And granted, this is old, camcorder from the early 90s. So it's, it's kind of grainy. We get it, but you know the point, you know what happened. And so with Rodney King, these officers beat this man within an inch of his life, and then they got off at trial. And so when they were acquitted, people just flooded the streets, and basically they were like, we just need to burn this down. We're tired. And not only did you have Rodney King, who his situation was completely unfortunate, you also had Latasha Harlins, and she's another one that we don't really hear about, we don't really know about. So around the same time as the Rodney King incident, Latasha walked into a Korean liquor store and she picked up a bottle of orange juice and she had the money to pay for the orange juice in her hand. And the shopkeeper, a Korean woman, accused her of stealing, even though Latasha was not stealing. And then Latasha just basically kind of got fed up with it. She kind of just threw the money away, like onto the counter, and just said, I'm done with this. As she was walking out, the shopkeeper shot her in the back of the head, killed her instantly. And I want to say Latasha was only maybe like 14 years old. Life snuffed out way too soon. And so with Latasha's situation, that was another catalyst in terms of the LA riots, in the sense of the shopkeeper told the district attorney that the gun went off by accident. And so I don't know how you shoot somebody in the back of the head as they're walking away by accident, but apparently that was believed. And so she, the Korean shop owner, only got, I want to say it was 5 years probation and like a $500 fine. She didn't serve any jail time. They basically felt like the crime was not that serious, but it was definitely that serious to Latasha's family, which they're actually still active to this day. They are still fighting for justice to this day. And then on the right side of the screen, we have Philando Castile, who was also shot and killed by police and also in the state of Minnesota. And so Philando was in the car with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's child. They were pulled over, I want to say, for like a seatbelt violation. And Philando Castile was a legal gun owner. He had his permit, he had the gun on him. He told the cop that he had the gun on him when they were pulled over. The cop asked him to get out his license, and as he reached to get the license, the cop shot him. He bled out and died. The cop did not administer any aid. And for me, this was particularly traumatizing because I actually watched this happen live. So before it got to the news and before it was a hashtag, somebody shared the live feed with me. And so Facebook ended up taking it down, but live on Facebook, I saw this man breathe his last breath. And I just cried and cried because I couldn't believe they let that man bleed out with his girlfriend right next to him. They didn't check his pulse. They didn't check on him. They didn't call an ambulance. And you could actually hear the officer in the background saying like, shit, I fucked up. Not checking to see if there was some aid that could be administered, if they could stop the bleeding. No, you could literally hear the cops in the background trying to get their story together so that they didn't get in trouble. So the cop that shot Philando Castile, they did try to bring him up on charges. They ended up firing him, but he like sued the department or the city or something like that. And they gave him money to go practice for another profession. And I'm sorry, but you shouldn't have been a fucking cop anyway. You shouldn't have been a cop in the first place if you shoot someone for taking out their wallet that you asked them to take out. If you're that scared, go to church. Don't be a cop. And so Philando Castile is important in the sense that, for one, there were definitely some uprisings and some protests that went on with his death. But he, like so many of these other people that I'm going to name, they attempted posthumous character assassination. So they came back to say, well, he had weed in his system and he had this and he had that. And I want to let you guys know, like, I want to go on record. If Philando Castile had 10 tons of methamphetamines in his blood, I don't give a shit. That man was killed for no reason. And till this day, the NRA, which is supposed to protect legal gun ownership, they have never made a statement. They have not made one comment. They have not said a single thing about Philando Castile being killed with his legal firearm that he had the permit for. So Philando was kind of sadly the precursor to what happened with George Floyd, because Minnesota is a state that has a very sordid history with Black people. They also have a very sordid history with police brutality. So he was a precursor to what we're dealing with today. So in making this collage, I just tried to pull up the cases that I could remember. I just tried to pull up the ones that I knew about. And I literally had to stop, take a cry break, because all the people I know that got killed by police, their pictures didn't fit on this slide. There were too many pictures. I had to sort through and say which people murdered by police should I highlight. And the fact that that's even a problem in this country is disgusting, completely disgusting. So the next one I want to talk about, she's very seldom known. A lot of people don't know about this case, and this was a little while ago. Her name was Aiyana Stanley Jones. And I know that there's a hashtag that says say her name. And I want you guys, I know you're muted, but I want you to say her name. Aiyana Stanley Jones, say her name. This baby was 7 years old. She didn't make it to her 8th birthday. I need a second. She was in her own home, asleep in her own bed with her grandmother. Her grandmother was actually holding her while she slept. And the police served a no-knock raid on the wrong house. Sounds familiar. They shot and killed this girl. Shot her in the head in front of her grandmother. And they actually blamed her grandmother for her death. They said that the grandmother grabbed the gun and that was why they shot. And they went back and tested the grandmother's hands for gun oil, for gunshot residue, and there was none because they were fucking lying. And the part that I think makes me the sickest of all, like the part that's the grossest of all, is that this went to trial. The cop who did the shooting, this went to trial. And this was part of some documentary, something similar to Cops. So the murder was actually caught on tape, but the cop went back to the producers and had the tape erased because he didn't want it to be presented at trial. So during the trial, they had the grandmother take the stand. And she was crying unconsolably. This woman could barely get words out, and I understand. I saw the trial video where they almost put the grandmother in jail for contempt of court, and the cop who shot her never saw a day in jail. If that doesn't let you know there's injustice in this country, I don't know what will. That woman was about to be put in jail for crying over her murdered granddaughter. But the person who murdered her granddaughter never saw jail. That makes no sense. And so again, with the character assassination, she's a baby, so I literally don't know what you could pull up on her. She threw a tantrum at 2, I don't know. But they tried to say that it was like her dad's half brother was a drug dealer, some shit, something where I was just like, again, I don't care if her dad's half brother was Pablo Escobar himself. I don't care if he was moving 10,000 tons of cocaine. You shot and killed a baby who had nothing to do with nothing. Right next to her is Trayvon Martin. And I hate even saying his killer's name. I hate giving him a moment of my time. I hate that that man is walking free, whereas Trayvon couldn't go to prom. He couldn't graduate from high school. He couldn't kiss his girlfriend. He couldn't give his parents grandbabies. There's all these things he's never gonna be able to do because walking in a hoodie just looks suspicious to that animal that killed him. And so with Trayvon, again, the character assassination, they tried to say after his death, like, oh, he got suspended from school for fighting and blah, 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 blah. So they had all these different things that basically dehumanized Trayvon and all these other Black people who were worthy of living to say that because you did X, Y, Z, you're not fully human and we don't need to acknowledge your death. And so I remember that sham of his killer's trial that I believe they only did just to stop the protests. And when he was acquitted, when he was let off, I collectively kind of felt, every Black person in America, like, I can't believe this. And unfortunately, that set up a chain of events to where when these murderers get arrested, we don't get excited. Because if you ever scroll through the comments, or if you ever have a candid conversation with a Black friend, when they say, oh, such and such got arrested, our reply is, call me when they get convicted. And then here's the real fuckery. They get convicted, call me when they get a sentence actually proportionate to the crime that they did. Because Amber Geiger, who killed Botham Jean, she got 8 years, which is a slap in the face. And she had the audacity, the unmitigated gall to appeal because she felt like that sentence was too harsh. I want you guys to understand that the injustice we face with police brutality and with angry citizens and their white supremacy and that brutality, that level of racism, that level of hatred is embedded in every system and every institution in this country. So when it comes to the criminal justice system, Amber Geiger, the murderer of Botham Jean, got 8 years for murdering that man in his own house. And I can tell you, I personally know of Black people who have gotten 20 years, 25 years, 25 years to life for having a joint, for stealing food out of a convenience store, for the 3 strikes law, for mandatory minimum sentencing, for over-policing, for falsified evidence. The Innocence Project, which I follow them and I try to donate to them when I can, the majority of people that the Innocence Project gets overturned sentences for, the vast majority are Black and brown. And almost always there's a false forced confession. Almost always there's an unreliable, quote unquote, eyewitness. There's DNA evidence that doesn't get tested. So when it came to his murderer, Trayvon Martin's murderer, they didn't even try. They didn't even say, you know, let's really get in here, let's get forensic, let's look at it, let's analyze this phone call. They didn't even try. In the case of the state of Florida and the stand your ground law, which doesn't apply to Black people, by the way, his life did not matter. And then right next to him, on the right there, is Ahmaud Arbery, who, that's a little bit more recent. He was murdered in February. He was out jogging. His crime was being outside while Black, and his crime was looking at a construction project, which I've done that a ton of times. I don't know about other people, but when I see like a house under construction, or, you know, I see different signs and stuff in the yard, I'm curious. I mean, I'm not saying I fully go inside and check it out, but you're curious, you want to know what's happening. And so it actually just came out today that the third suspect in his murder, the third person they detained, he actually said, and I'm quoting, when he shot the round that killed Ahmaud, he said, fucking niggers. That was his statement directly after shooting him. And so now people are calling for a hate crime enhancement. And truth be told, I highly doubt that they will get that hate crime enhancement, because even though those laws exist specifically for this reason, they are almost never applied in the case of a murdered Black person. If that's not a hate crime, if he didn't do that specifically because of hate, like the witness is on record saying that he didn't see Ahmaud do anything, he just knew he was guilty because he's Black. He's on record saying that. It's still not going to be called a hate crime. So keep that in mind. So next we have Sandra Bland. And she's another where we need to say her name for sure. But she was one of our own. Sandra Bland was actually a student affairs professional, and she was driving in Texas because she had just gotten a new job. And she was moving, she was relocating, she was about to start a new life in Texas. When she got pulled over by a cop with an ego issue. And so I don't know if people realize this, but something as simple as being pulled over is one of the most fear-inducing things in my life. Because I could be pulled over for no reason at all. And I have been pulled over for no reason at all. And so this cop, I've watched that video time and time again, and he just kept pushing, he kept instigating, he kept doing everything he could do because he wanted a reaction for her. He wanted a reason to have to arrest her. And so he finally got the reaction he wanted after he dragged her out of the car. The jail where she perished at hid so much, lied about so much. The cop that arrested her, he did not get convicted or indicted in terms of the murder charges, but he did end up getting terminated, and he ended up getting, I want to say it was like probation. It was nothing crazy, for perjury because he lied. So the problem was that he lied, not that somebody died. And so her parents, her family, everybody, they till this day still don't have answers. There's so much that was hidden. There's so much that we don't know. But one thing that I do know is Sandra Bland did not kill herself. And this lie that it was suicide that gets perpetuated, it's ridiculous. You are trying to collectively piss in the face of Black America and tell us that it's raining. This woman didn't kill herself. You guys brutalized her, you killed her, and you tried to cover it up. And we might not ever get justice for Sandra Bland. And that's why it bothers me so deeply. Oh, there we go. Sorry, did it again. Okay, Tatiana Jefferson. Her case is unfortunate for the reason that all these cases are unfortunate. She was in her own home. She was playing video games with her nephew, and a neighbor of hers called the police because her front door was ajar. Now, I'm not saying, you know, I've perfected the art of adulting, but there's been times where, you know, I've been bringing the groceries in, or I thought my son closed the door, but he didn't, or whatever the case may be, and my front door might be a little bit open. Obviously, when I see that it's open, I go close it, I go lock it, but not a crime. It's not a crime to have your front door cracked. So the neighbor called the police came, and they killed this woman in her home. And what breaks my heart is that a few weeks after Tatiana was killed, say her name, her mother died. And then a few months after her mother died, her father died. And I know that a coroner can't list a broken heart, you know, as a cause of death, but I honestly think for both of her parents, a broken heart was their cause of death. So again, on that list of things that Black people can't do, we can't be in our own home playing video games, and we can't leave our front door cracked because that could cause our death. Okay, I gotta figure out how to use Prezi one of these days. All right. So this one is tough. So this is Tamir Rice, and he was 12 years old, and he lived in the state of Ohio, an open carry state. He was playing with a toy gun in the park. A woman called the police and said, you know, there's a kid in the park with a toy gun. The dispatcher who she spoke to didn't necessarily say that it was a toy gun. So the cops showed up thinking that there was somebody there with a live gun waving it at people. The dispatcher did end up getting fired, which I don't think is enough, but she did end up getting fired. And I feel like, I mean, I'm gonna talk about this later, but I feel like this is a good time for me to say, stop calling the police on every damn thing. Stop calling the police. When you call the police, you're basically saying you don't care if we live or die, because that interaction with the police could literally be the death of us. I've seen the video of him being murdered, And that cop showed up. He didn't ask a question. He didn't look around. He didn't take in the scene. He got out the car. He opened the door and he shot Tamir Rice dead. And so I am a mother of 2 children. One of them is my almost 10-year-old son. And every time I would see the look of despair on Tamir Rice's mother's face, whew, I don't know how to put into words and explain to you what it's like to have a Black son in America. I can't put that level of fear and agony. I cannot explain that to you. I don't have words. In the student affairs professionals group, where there's always something's always popping off. We know that. There was a guy in there, I don't even remember his name, but I had to give him the business real quick and let him know, you're not gonna tell me and other Black people how to feel about this situation. And so in my rebuttal to him, I explained the fear in my heart when my son walks to the mailbox. What kind of country do we live in where my son can't walk to the mailbox because I'm afraid of him walking to the mailbox in the community that we live in, because I know the police patrol there, because I know how the police act. The community that I live in, I have my 60-year-old father living with me. He's a disabled veteran and he suffers from hearing loss. And so my dad used to walk to the store himself, and I don't let him walk to the store anymore. And he thinks I'm overdoing it. But God forbid, one time one of these cops is having a bad day and they start yelling commands at him, he literally cannot hear them. And so if they think he's ignoring him, or they think he has a gun or a knife, that's the end of my dad. He can't walk to the store. So when it comes to the death of babies, that hits me just that much harder. Because again, his mom is never gonna see him graduate from high school. She's never gonna see prom. She's never gonna see his wedding. She's never gonna see him go to college. She was robbed of all these events because of a gun-happy cop. And yet again, this cop did not go to prison. Yet again, they did not bring charges.
Ariel, we have a question in the chat.
Sure.
You know that any states have fines or consequences for calling the police in non-threatening situations, basically to address the Amy Coopers and barbecue Beckys out there?
So I know that the state of New York or the city of New York, forgive me, I know one of them, they have actually put up a bill to make it against the law to call 911 for frivolous reasons. And then barbecue Becky was in Oakland, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that that city put in an ordinance to stop calling for frivolous reasons. But in my honest opinion, it should be federal law, 100%. And I'm gonna tell you guys something that yet again, you won't see on the news. They don't teach you in history or civics. But I don't know if you guys know this, that there's some counties, cities, etc., that they have laws against how many times you call the police. So there are people who are victims of domestic violence, where if you call that 5th time or whatever that magic number is because of domestic violence, the police will actually come to your home and arrest you because you called them too much. So if I'm experiencing intimate partner violence and I'm getting beaten, I have to fear calling the police because there might be repercussions for me. But these barbecue Beckys, oh, you're breathing. Oh, you're in the gym. Oh, you're at Starbucks. Oh, you don't look like you belong here. Oh, where's your key card? Tell me where's your apartment. Show me your ID. They're calling the police for absolutely nothing. And there hasn't, as of yet, been a repercussion for that. So I know that there's places who are working on laws, but as far as I know, there's no widespread standing law that says you cannot call the police on people for dumb stuff. Like, as of right now, that does not exist. Is there any other question in the chat? Okay. All right, so this is Eric Garner, and he's so similar to George Floyd in the sense that Eric Garner was in front of a liquor store. He was selling loose cigarettes, which that's illegal. It is illegal. You have to sell tobacco products in their pack. You have to have a permit, all that good stuff. But he was out there selling loose cigarettes. A cop decided he wanted to bother him. The cop was plain clothes, so he didn't necessarily know it was a cop. And the cop used a illegal chokehold, an illegal restraint. And Eric Garner kept shouting over and over and over and over again, "I can't breathe." And even with that, the cop kept strangling him and he died. Now, the officer, and again, I don't like using these murderers' names. Like, I know what their names are. I don't like saying it. I don't like for it to leave my lips. So I apologize. You're welcome to Google it and look up the officer's name. But I want to say a couple months after he killed Eric Garner, he was given a raise, like a hefty raise. And so he was still on the force. He was still operating. They didn't even decide to start looking at a grand jury until like a really significant time after Eric Garner had died. And then even when they did, they still didn't bring charges against that officer. I think he did end up getting terminated, but again, it took like 3 years. It was like a significantly long amount of time. And so Eric Garner's daughter, Erica Garner, she was an activist not only for her father, but against police brutality. She was out there at the protests, unfortunately for so many other people slain by police. And then Erica Garner also was known to have a very critical case of asthma. So she did start having some issues. She was admitted into a hospital. The police guarded her room, even though she was not under arrest. They would not let the family come in and visit. And then mysteriously, a little while after she was admitted into the hospital, she died. And all of the details surrounding how she died and what happened and what nurse or doctor did what still hasn't really been released. But understand that when these people are unjustly killed by the police, you affect their family for generations. Because Erica Garner had kids who don't have a mom. So now you have kids who don't have a mom and a grandfather now. The fact that the police were even present at the hospital for somebody who is not being detained, somebody who is not under arrest, is disgusting. The police had no place there and they shouldn't have been there, but they were. George Floyd, and some people say that all the protests, all the uprising are because of George Floyd. Everything that's happening is for everything leading up to and including George Floyd. So I want to get that right. Everybody was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and George Floyd was just the camel that broke, it was the straw that broke all the camel's backs. Everybody was just tired. And so with George Floyd, there is still some details that are a little bit fuzzy because at first they said he was trying to use a bad check. Then they said it was a counterfeit $20 bill. I'm here to tell you that I've been on both sides of that, where I've gone to a store and I tried to pay with a 20 and they said, oh, the 20, the marker's not working. This doesn't appear to be a legitimate 20. Of course, I don't have a secret fake money press in my house and I'm trying to pass off illegal funds. These bills get circulated into the system and unknowingly people have counterfeit money. It's nothing that they're trying to do, it just happens. And so even if, you know, it was a counterfeit 20, even if he was purposely trying to pass this 20 off, I want to let you guys know that I've seen parts of the video footage of George Floyd's demise, but I can't watch all of it. I tried to kind of work myself up to it. I tried to kind of say, eventually I'll get to a place where I can watch it. But when I found out he was calling out for his mom, I was like, I I can't do it. Because his mom was already dead. And so for him, calling out to his mom was his way of saying, like, I'm done. I know I'm not going to get out of this. So the only comfort I'm going to know is my mother in heaven. That's all I'm going to know. And so in his case, the cops handcuffed him. Well, the cops were called in the first place, which goes back to my point. Stop calling the damn police. A counterfeit 20, you know what you do if you're a cashier and someone gives you a fake 20? Give that shit back and tell them you can't accept it. That's how you solve that. You don't need to call the police. But the police were called, they came, they handcuffed him, and there's footage showing that while he was handcuffed sitting in the back of the squad car, they were actually punching and beating him while he was already handcuffed. So they had already been pummeling him. They took him out the car and laid him face down on the ground. And then not only was it Officer Chauvin's knee in his neck, two of the other officers were putting their knee in his back. And so when you start crushing important arteries, when you start smothering somebody's lungs, when you start pushing on their chest cavity, a lot of people were saying, well, if he couldn't breathe, how could he keep saying he couldn't breathe? Blood flow was not going to this man's brain. They basically asphyxiated him slowly, which that sounds like a horrible death. You would almost rather drown, because if you're drowning, at least the water fills up your lungs and it's a little bit quicker. But for almost 9 minutes, that man could feel the life leaving his body. That's insane. So that first autopsy was horseshit. We all know that. The first autopsy where they said, well, he had underlying health conditions. Underlying health conditions didn't kill him. A knee to the neck did. And so justice for George Floyd, a lot of people are like, well, they arrested the main officer. Okay, well, they arrested the other 3. For those of you who have been following the curated pre-homework that I have been putting in the Facebook event page, they've arrested over 5,000 protesters, over 5,000 across the US, when all they had to do was arrest 4. If they would have arrested Officer Chauvin and the other 3 officers from day one, I honestly don't think that this situation that we're dealing with right now, I don't think this uprising would have got to this level if from day one they said, we are not playing with you, and they arrested them. There is a video I did watch, and I think the only reason I could watch it is because I know these young people didn't die, where there was a young man, a young lady, they were out past curfew in Atlanta, and they were in the car. They weren't bothering anybody. They didn't have a gun, nothing like that. They were just out past curfew. And the officers broke their window, tasered them multiple times, reached in, snatched them out, beat them when they snatched them out of the car. And the mayor of Atlanta, Keisha Lance Bottoms, I give that woman a lot of credit, because she said, we're not playing this today. She fired them and arrested them within 48 hours. She was like, we're not playing. And keep in mind, I realize that with police and police unions, sometimes these things aren't quote unquote easy to do. But if you're in a position of leadership, understand that you're making the decision to either terminate an arrest or deal with the aftermath of a riot. So basically, you're gonna pick what you're gonna do. And so I respect the fact that she's trying to quell the uprising in her city, and she's taking direct and immediate action. She's not playing with people, and I respect that. And then this young lady is not talked about enough, but this is Breonna Taylor. And whew, Breonna Taylor, her story is very similar to Ayanna Stanley Jones. She was in her house with her boyfriend, in her bed sleep, minding her business, and suddenly somebody busts in the door. And her boyfriend is a legal firearm carrier, and he thinks somebody is breaking into the house, and rightfully so. So he gets up with his gun, ready to defend his home and defend his girlfriend. The police shoot, I want to say they shot like 20 something times, but they hit Breonna 8 times and killed her in her bed. Again, another no-knock raid. For the record, we need to put an end to no-knock raids. We need to just cut that shit out. because it's too dangerous, it's too deadly. We don't need to do no knock raids. We just need to cut it out. But basically, the police admitted that for one, they had already captured the person that they were looking for. So they knew that the person wasn't there. Oh, sorry. And for two, they knew it wasn't the wrong house. They were serving a no-knock raid on the wrong house. So Breonna Taylor's boyfriend actually was in jail for a while. So he was charged, I want to say, with attempted murder of a police officer. Now, this next part, and again, we say her name, Breonna Taylor. What bothers me is that this happened almost 2 months ago. Nobody's been fired. Nobody's been charged. The only person who went to jail was her boyfriend. Now, after public pressure, they did release her boyfriend from jail, so he is back home now. But in terms of the cops who murdered this woman, no justice has been served in her case as of yet. So she was from Louisville, Kentucky, which is like the Midwest. But I feel like wherever you're at, from whatever location that you're at, we need to keep putting pressure on the police chief, on the mayor, on the DA, on everybody. We need to be calling, signing petitions, whatever we need to do until somebody pays for what they did to this woman sleeping in her own home. We can't rest. That's why it's called civil unrest, because we can't rest until it gets worked out. All right, so now I want to talk about where we are today. And so this one is simple. I have MLK here, and in this particular picture, this is during his march in Selma. Everybody in that picture in that front row is deceased except John Lewis, who's on the right. And John Lewis got his skull cracked by a police officer in the course of a peaceful protest. I really wish people would stop saying, well, what about peaceful protests? MLK did peaceful protests. These protests weren't peaceful because every time he showed up harboring peace, there were dogs and water hoses and billy clubs and whatever else to meet him and his people while they were there. You guys truly do not know and do not understand how many people died during the civil rights movement, and it was never documented. MLK's home was burned down, bombs were planted, little girls were bombed in church. You don't know the amount of terrorism that was brought on these peaceful protesters. So these protests weren't peaceful because the people who didn't want them to get rights made a point to let them know that danger is going to come to you if you keep asking for equality for Black people. So 4 years ago, we had Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling, and kneeling is not some sort of revolutionary act. He was kneeling. He was saying that this flag and this Pledge of Allegiance were not written for me, and they weren't. And the Constitution was not written for Black people. A lot of things were not written with us in mind. Matter of fact, they were written to purposely exclude us. And so I watched an interview where he said he will stop kneeling when we get equality and these freedoms that these songs and these pledges talk about actually apply to Black people. He said he'll stop kneeling then. Well, he can't stop kneeling because that was 4 years ago. That was peaceful. And people lost their damn mind because this man kneeled. And his career with the NFL was basically ended over him kneeling, even though he was one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the league at the time. So understand that him taking a stand and peacefully protesting, you were like, nope, that's not the way to do it. And so now we got the picture on the top right. So that fist in the air, that goes back to I think it was the 68 Olympics, where 2 of the athletes, they put their fist in the air at the medaling podium. And that was a way of saying Black solidarity. That was a way of saying we understand, we're in the fight now. Now, I'm not saying I condone burning up the Arby's. I'm sure the Arby's makes really good shakes. I mean, I get it. But I'm saying that this is the result of literally hundreds of years of people peacefully saying, please don't kill us. And nobody listened when it was quote unquote peaceful. And MLK said, a riot is the language of the unheard. You didn't listen, so you're gonna learn today. And so when it comes to the protesters, a lot of people are focusing like, what about the looters? What about the destruction? You can build a business back. You have insurance claims to cover that. I can't bring George Floyd back. I can't bring Breonna Taylor back. I can't bring Ahmaud Arbery back. People have lost life. And if your focus is not the loss of life and the discrimination that led to the loss of life, your focus is the wrong thing. All right, it's action time. Now, what can you do now? Now, keep in mind that when it comes to these actions, these are for people at various levels in their career. This is for people with various access to different resources. This is depending on your proximity and relationship to Black people around you. This is dependent on a lot of things. So I realize that we don't have, 300 college presidents on the line. Like, I get that. But wherever you are and whatever you do, trust you could do something. Now, first, be conscious. That's literally you stopping and thinking about your words, about your posts, about your replies, about what's bothering you, about you valuing your opinions and your voice over that of the people actually affected. Literally just being cognizant of your words and actions. So, as you all know, there is a separate student affairs professionals group because of Black people. There were some things going on in the general student affairs professional group where Black people say, we gotta separate, we gotta go somewhere else. And so in that group, and not just in that group, since the founding of that group, so even before where we're at today, they've talked about the micro and macro aggressions that they've experienced on their campus. And so one thing, it seems kind of small, but it's actually kind of big. One thing is when managers and supervisors are hosting Zoom meetings, which I get, that's our method of communication now, we got to do that. And you have Black folks who are trying to leave the video off. They are just not there. They don't want you looking at their face right now. They're over it. Forcing them to turn their video on because you need to see their face, quote unquote, that is an act of aggression. They're telling you, I'm not with it today. Leave me be. And if somebody asks you, leave me be, do that. And then if your college or you personally, if you want to make a statement about what's going on, when you focus on looting and rioting more than you focus on what's actually happening and why it happened, that is harm. You are causing harm. I know that some people say, well, I want to check on my Black employees. I want to check on my friends. Be conscious of how you're checking on them. Don't do it in an evasive way. As many of you probably have, I've experienced loss, like I've experienced death, right? And in the course of that grieving process, I completely understand that people want to call, they want to offer condolences, they want to, send flowers, different stuff. I get that. That's your reaction. Like, this is how I offer condolences, right? But in those times of mourning, I've had people overdo it. Like when I've said, you know what, I need a little bit of a break. I need some space. I'm gonna turn my phone off for a little bit. I've had people who were like offended that I was like, I don't want to necessarily talk to you right now. So I don't speak for every Black person in America, but I can tell you collectively, we are grieving and mourning right now. Not only do we have George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, but we have COVID-19. We have medical racism, where when one of our people is diagnosed with COVID, we have so many Black people that went to the hospital and got turned away. They had COVID, they died from COVID, and the hospital said, we won't even take you. Then you got people who actually do get taken in by the hospital, and there's nurses out there putting out videos saying that there is medical negligence which has been happening well before COVID-19. And we have people dying left and right from COVID-19, majority of them Black. Then we have people dying by police violence. We have women dying in the process of childbirth because they're Black. We have so many people and situations and realities that we are grieving that will never exist again. You have to give us space. We got to process. And it's not one death and then we grieve and then we move on. It's the continual death and the continual grieving. And then we got people picking at the scab. So I've had coworkers multiple times, and I know their heart was in the right place. I know they didn't mean it viciously, but they would make statements like, well, why didn't he just comply? Well, if you follow the law, stuff like this doesn't happen to you, right? Well, if you're educated or you work this job, that whole respectability politics bullshit, if you do X, Y, Z, they're not gonna bother you, right? I'm a Black woman working on a doctorate degree. I am doing pretty decent financially, if I say so myself. And that still doesn't stop the cops from fucking with me. So if I were male, if I were darker, if I had a criminal history, if my pants were sagged, all these different other ifs, understand that the situation will be a whole lot worse. So please don't make statements about any type of blame, victim blaming, any type of attaching guilt, any type of character assassination for the departed. Don't do it. Even if you're thinking it, don't do it. Your Black coworker or your Black friend does not want to process that with you. Go find your fellow white people and y'all process that together, but do not bring that bullshit to my porch today, all right? If you're in a supervisory role and you have a Black staff member who says, I need a day off, or 2 or 3, and they got the time to take that time off, let them have it. I am more exhausted than I've ever been in my whole entire life. And I'm fortunate because I have a Black woman boss who from the very beginning, she was like, Ariel, I know you're tired. She was on her own proactively saying, let me take some steps back. Let me not add anything to your plate right now. So if you have a Black person that you supervise and they're saying, I don't necessarily want to jump on that team project right now, respect that, honor that. There are book lists, there are videos, there are so many ways that you can self-educate without being dependent on the labor of a Black person. And so I realized that I have volunteered, I have willfully said, I will come, I will occupy this space and give you the information that I know of. But that's not to say that I'm going to be here or all Black people will be here like this all the time. There's a video, and I'll probably put it in the Facebook event page. So just a disclaimer, I don't believe in allyship. I'm just gonna let you know. I told you guys I was gonna keep it real, I'm keeping it real. I don't believe in allyship. Allyship is this very passive, laissez-faire, oh, let me use the Black Lives Matter hashtag every once in a while. Oh, you know, my Black friend, she's so pretty, I love her during Black History Month. It's this very non-committal thing to be an ally. If you want to be anything, be an accomplice, be an abolitionist, be somebody who is putting their life, their career, their finances, their joy, their time, their comfort on the line. That's what you should be being right now. And so when I mentioned that in regards to a video, there's a video of Stephon Clark's brother. And so for those of you who don't know, Stephon Clark is a young man who was shot and killed in his grandmother's backyard. He was accused of breaking into a car, breaking into a home. None of it was founded, but he was accused of it. They chased him down with copters. They shot him and killed him in his grandmother's backyard. And I was told that they didn't even tell her that he was dead back there. They just let her walk back there and see her shot and killed grandson. That's despicable. And so what I appreciate is that Stephon Clark's brother and other members of the community up in Northern California, they showed up to city council meetings and they took up space and they said, we need justice for Stephon. These officers need to be fired. We need action. And so the accomplices, the abolitionists, not allies, who showed up with Stephon's brother, they actually physically surrounded him when the cops were trying to arrest him. And it's crazy because you can see how when these folks put their body in the way, the cops wouldn't hit them. The cops wouldn't tase them. The cops were not hitting them with a billy club. The cops just moved away. That is what you strive to be, not, oh, I did blackout on Tuesday, so I've absolved myself of all the sins of white supremacy. Now, for those who have it, if you have access to financial resources, bail funds and other organizations are absolutely crucial right now. A lot of people are like, oh, the people who are in jail are the rioters and the looters. No, that's not true. I've seen video with my own eyes. I've seen the live streams where people were truly peacefully protesting. They were only kneeling. They were only holding up a sign. They were not in the way. They weren't blocking traffic. They weren't looting, nothing like that. And cops are spraying them dead in the face. Cops are shooting tear gas cannons at them. They're being hit with rubber bullets. They're being arrested for exercising their First Amendment rights. Those people need bail funds because the longer that they sit in that jail, the longer they are not going to work, the longer that they may lose that job, lose benefits, the longer that they don't have someone to care for their children while they're incarcerated. There are so many things that are going to snowball and make that person's life worse because they were out there doing the work, putting their body on the line for the protest. So I have some links that talk about not only bail funds, but other organizations that help with other items that are kind of peripheral to what we have going on with police violence. All right, so first of all, not Shaun King and not Tim Wise, and I'm gonna tell you why. So Shaun King's heart is in the right place as far as I know. He wants justice for these families, but I have problems with his accounting. That's where I struggle. Because I don't know if you guys notice, every couple of months, somebody comes and says, well, Shaun King got donations for us, but we never saw it. Well, we worked for Shaun King, but we never got paid. And the thing is, where there's smoke, there's fire. It would be one thing if he got accused of this one time, but this has happened several times over the years, and he don't have receipts. In Black vernacular, receipts mean he can't pull out proof and say, well, this money went there, that money. Nobody knows. And I'm not talking about 20s and 50s. I'm talking about tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars where nobody knows where it goes. I'm not okay with that. So I realize he's trying to fundraise. I realize he's trying to work with lawyers for the families. I get that. But I personally would not send money his way. And then not Tim Wise. So Tim Wise is world renowned for being an anti-racism speaker. But I don't find it appropriate myself to pay a white person to be a Black person whisperer and tell you other people's lived experiences of being Black in America. That doesn't make any sense to me. Go directly to the source. In addition to that, he's been extremely problematic when it comes to his conflicts with Black female activists. He said some very untoward things. He's never been very repentant about that. So Tim Wise is also not where I would direct donations to. So the next bullet is the GoFundMe for George Floyd. The one right after that is the GoFundMe for Breonna Taylor. The Minnesota Freedom Fund is not only paying for the bail of people arrested in the Minnesota protests, but they're also paying for medical supplies and water. Speaking of which, there's also video of police destroying medical supplies and water for protesters, literally just because they can. There's no reason for a cop to do that, but they're just doing it because they can. The Know Your Rights camp is actually Colin Kaepernick's organization. So that is also going towards bail funds, but it's also going towards education and other programming to keep people in the communities most affected by police violence safe. The next two bullets, these are actually people in organizations that I've known about for years and years. So the first one is the Community Coalition of South LA, or CocoSouthLA.org. So Gilbert Johnson is their lead organizer. And I actually went to college with him. So the community of LA, South LA, particularly South Central LA, there's been a lot of unrest and a lot of things going on there for years. But I was actually on a call with them earlier this week where they are putting, feet to the ground. They are putting things on paper. They are making demands of LA Mayor Eric Garcetti and saying, here's what we need. And I don't know if you guys saw, they haven't fully defunded the police, but they have decreased the police budget for the next fiscal year, I want to say by $200 million, which that is significant. So when it comes to organizations that are really out there, Gilbert is on the front lines. He is there. He has live video. He is on the front lines in the marches, in the protests, and with 5 babies at home. 5, 5. So that is Gilbert's cash out. And so in terms of the protest itself, they're definitely helping the people on their team that have been arrested or been harmed by police violence in the midst of the protest. But in addition to that, there's other issues and other causes going on in LA, and particularly gentrification and people who are being pushed out of their homes, rent relief. I don't know if you guys know, but rent in LA is outrageous, like completely outrageous, where people basically can't afford to live there anymore. So they do a lot when it comes to just basically making sure that they keep their community whole and safe. The last bullet is the Mutual Aid Action of Los Angeles and the Revolutionary Autonomous Communities. So this is an organization through a friend of mine from college, Mauricio Rios. And so he's a Central American gentleman, but at the same time, I have to tell you that he has been speaking loudly and boldly for Black lives as long as I've known him. And this goes back over a decade. So he's also out there front lines, talking the talk, walking the walk. Part of his organizations is that they grow their own food. They feed members of the LA community that are not necessarily secure in terms of housing or food. In addition to that, they're also fighting for the rights of Black and brown communities. And so I definitely wanted to represent them, and not to embarrass him, but he's gone so far as when there was women in need of feminine products, like for their menstrual cycle, he's online like, can I please get donations? Can you please mail them here? So he's really out there doing the work. And then that very last piece, that Ariel, that is me. That is all of my things on PayPal, Cash App, and Venmo. So I'm not in any way saying this is me passing around the offering plate, everybody has to donate. It's not saying that, but this is me saying that there was a certain amount of intellectual and emotional labor that went into this presentation. And there's a certain amount of that labor that I'm committed to after this, in the hopes that there can be some reconciliation, that we can move forward, and that people are attached to this cause right now, not just because it's trendy, but for the long run. Because police reform, justice reform, equity for Black people in the United States, it's not gonna happen like a light switch. We're not gonna wake up tomorrow, everything's fine. And after this election, I hate to tell some folks, even if we have a different president, still, we're not gonna wake up on January 21st or whenever it is they do the inauguration and everything's fine. It took 400 years to get here, so it's going to take several years to come out of this. And so I still wanna make myself available, not too available, because I'm still a doctoral student working full-time with 2 kids and my dad and my 3 cats. But I want to make myself available to try to lend my voice to help people understand firsthand, this is why we fight. So I know you guys can't see my face right now, let me come out of the Prezi real quick.
If I could just jump in super quick, I want to underline the importance in this space of paying Ariel for the work that she put into this. In case you didn't write it down, her Cash App is AVIS2783. She spent a lot of time on this, and she did not have to. She did not owe any of us any of this. And I don't want this to be another instance of white people taking advantage of Black folks' emotional labor. So I just want to really underline that if you have $15, I need you to send it Ariel's way.
Thank you. My eyebrows are in need of Jesus. I just want to let you know. They have not been touched in 3 months. I'm looking real crazy. So if you want to donate to the Ariel Jackson Davis Eyebrow Fund, I completely support that. I know that with Margy and Tyler, you guys also discussed an accountability group as well. Could you guys speak to that?
Oh, go for it, Margy.
I was just going to say Tyler can talk about it because he made the form.
So we did make a form that we'll post it on the Facebook page as well. But I'm going to put it in the chat. So if you want to sign up, put your just name, email address, and topics you're interested in engaging on. Margy and I will kind of coordinate and try and organize us as white educators. And it really, again, I think I just have to say, Ariel, thank you for sharing your heart, your humanity with us, because I think what I've learned along the way is what we're talking about is being better human beings. And, the work we're doing is to save our souls, in a sense, as white folks, as much as making the world a better place for Black folks as well. So I think if we want to do the work as white educators, Margy and I will do the work to organize us into groups. If you have similar interests or similar dialogue things you want to talk about, we'll put it in the Facebook page, but I did put it in the chat for you. But yeah, I think we're willing to keep this has to be the ongoing work. This is not a one-stop deal. Just because we listen, just because we, that's not the solution. So Margy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, no, my last thing, number one, thank you again to Ariel for being willing to do this. It's really, really powerful. And we are all super fortunate. All that to say, I think that so often we come to these spaces and we expect a roadmap, right? Like these are the nice, easy steps. The steps are not easy, and they're messy and they're uncomfortable, and you're gonna hate it the whole time. But you should, because it's uncomfortable and it's awful, so we have to sit with that. So my last call to you at the end of this gathering is that if you see your friends saying shit on Facebook, you have a moral obligation to educate them as white people. You can't rely on your Black friends to step in and say something, and you can't just shrug and say, it's just Ben I went to high school with, and scroll by, right? Like, you have a moral obligation to actively work to end this situation that we have created.
And if you need help with that, Margy and I'm not going to speak for Margy. I know I am willing. If you want to direct message me on kind of like, hey, I've got white friends being white and I don't know how to engage with it. I think that's kind of what I feel comfortable doing. And so I think I can give you some dialogue or resources that you can share, or, ways to push back gently, sometimes harder, with your friends. So again, I think I would put out there, feel free to direct message me and send me a message, and I will be glad to walk you through that and help you in any way I can.
Yes, so I definitely want to hold some space for a little bit of a Q&A. And I forgot to do this at the beginning, so I want to do this now. And I want to explain to you that I'm doing what I'm doing today because my mother did this in the 70s and 80s, because my grandmother did this in the 50s and 60s. My grandmother was actually one of those teens sitting at the lunch counter where they were dumping food on them and pushing them and beating them. This is what my great-grandmother was doing in the 30s and 40s. And I have a 3-year-old daughter, part of a long legacy. She's protesting nap time right now, but I know she'll be protesting something else in the future. So I want to honor the ancestors. I want to honor the people before me, because I feel like they did a lot of this work. All they did was just give me a little bit of that spirit so that I could keep fighting. And so in terms of Q&A, I'm going to let Margy and Tyler kind of field that. And I just want to leave a couple minutes for it. And just so you guys know, I kind of forgot to throw this out there too. I also do speaking engagements and trainings at colleges. And so if you want to get in touch with me when COVID-19 is not ruining the earth, and you actually are back into your office and you actually have funds, if you want me to come out, you want me to host a webinar, that's also a labor that I do in addition to my regular job and my doctoral program. So if you have some particular topics that you want me to come talk about when it comes to seeking justice for first-generation students, Black students, when it comes to burnout for Black employees in your organization, things like that, I have spoken on that in the past and I'm happy to do that again.
Ariel, there's a question in the chat if you would be willing to, or if you have in the past done any trainings over Zoom.
So this is my first webinar over Zoom. Everything else I've done in person, but I'm happy to do just, like we did just now, I'm happy to do trainings over Zoom as well.
Another question in the chat. Do you have any recommendations about where to find hard facts and statistics to help educate people who argue that police brutality cases are independent bad apple situations that are not related to race?
So there are organizations that do kind of keep track of situations. One of them I would say is the ACLU. Another one is the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the name Southern Poverty Law Center is a little bit misleading because they don't just do Southern and it's not just poverty. But they actually keep track of hate crimes, of police brutality. They keep statistics on that. The ACLU, they keep track of it in the sense of who they sue and who they file amicus briefs for. So those are two organizations on the national level that I know who do that. But I also want to give a shout out to the grassroots organizations because there's also people in places that are local to specific communities. So similar to how I talked about Community Coalition of South LA, you have a COCO of South LA, but for where you're from, where they look at the police brutality and the instances of inequity and disparity in your community. And I would say reach out to them. So for me, when it comes to Southern California, I kind of consider all of this my community. I'm from Louisiana. I consider New Orleans and the New Orleans area my community. So I would say that those are things that you have to kind of look out for a little bit because across the nation, there are hundreds of those grassroots organizations.
Can I add something, Ariel, if you don't mind? Because in dealing with whiteness, one of the things that has been helpful in talking to white folks about the bad apple thing is I usually will go back to Enron, and I date myself. Enron was a bad company. Like, we can all agree Enron was a bad company. But there were good people who worked for Enron. That doesn't mean that everybody who worked for Enron was bad. And I think helping people understand the system of policing as separate and different from the humans that work within the system. Because there are good officers who are trying to dismantle the problems within the system. The system is problematic and was built to be problematic. So I think helping our white friends understand the difference between individualism and systemic issues. And so I have found that Enron discussion has helped some of my white friends understand a little bit better the separation of the two.
100%. So I want to make it clear and evident that I'm not one of the people who's like, I hate all cops forever. I am not one of those people because I have seen with my own eyes police officers who are invested in their community, who spend time with their community, who are looking at education and preventative services, and they are not invested in over-policing and running a quota of arrests and loading up juvenile halls and jails for profit. So the prison industrial complex has a lot of tentacles. And when I tell you the tentacles, you guys would not believe, because I myself have been in high schools where they keep a probation officer in the high school because of how many kids have been arrested by the school resource officer. So that's food for thought. So I want you guys to just be aware and just think about, there are people in these police forces who are trying to stand up and do the right thing, but a lot of times what happens to them afterwards is not good. There was a cop who came out around the time of the Philando Castile murder, and he was talking about some corruption in his police force, and they burnt his house down. literally they told him, we're gonna burn your house down, and like the next day burnt his house down. So keep in mind that when police stand up and say there's corruption, there's something going on, sometimes it is a matter of life and death. Because in higher ed, I feel like we put a lot on the line when we stand up, because trust, I have a seat at a couple of tables. There's a couple of committees and stuff that they put me on. And I already know when they see me raise their hand, they're like, oh God, here's Ariel. And that's okay. They can feel like that. But I'm going to continue advocating and standing up for what's right. See what I'm saying? But my life's not on the line. Nobody's going to burn my house down because I don't agree with the way they handle a line item in the budget. You know what I mean? So when it comes to you as a professional working in higher ed, you have the ability to step up and say what you need to say. When it comes to reading lists, we did put a reading list in the discussion for the Facebook event. And I'm wondering if, in terms of the accountability group, if that's like a Facebook group. I mean, I guess in theory, I could continue to kind of curate articles, videos, different things for people to say, okay, you know, that helps me understand better. But yeah, there's a ton of books out there that can really give you a guideline, that can really give you a roadmap to say, this is how I work my way from being just not racist to an anti-racism worker.
So we have a question that came in privately, and it's about bail funds. So this person is wondering, they've donated to some, and then they saw messages from some reliable sources that they were fully funded. So they are wondering if you know if there's a way to find updated info on who still needs money donated to their bail funds.
So there is a national organization, and forgive me because I forgot their website off the top of my head, where that national organization will spread those bail funds to other communities that still need that support and assistance. Because I know for a fact, they still arresting people in LA. So just in case you're wondering, Los Angeles is still arresting people, and they are still having protests and uprisings in LA. I can't speak for all cities, but I want to find what that website is. Now, in addition to that, I appreciate these vetted organizations. I appreciate that when they have fully funded everybody's bail, they honestly and transparently say, okay, now we're going to pay some rent for some people who are going to get evicted, because some states had like a stay of eviction during COVID-19, but in some states that's up now. Now that we're in June, that's up. They are still doing programming and services for people who have been victims of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because that took a spike during COVID-19 as well. They're still working with people who are homeless, who are housing insecure, who are food insecure. So some of these programs are doing the ongoing work. It's not just the bail, they're literally funding everything, even around the situation that needs support.
Someone did just follow up with me privately as well and let me know that the Minnesota Freedom Fund has a list of organizations on their website that they're suggesting folks donate to. So that could be a good starting point for some people as well.
Definitely, definitely.
We do have a vulnerable question. Some people, and I think all of us, I think this echoes all of us, we want to commit to speaking up more, but I think we worry about saying the wrong thing despite good intentions. What would your advice be?
So I feel like that whole analogy of like a toddler, how they have to like fall a little bit, they got to bump their head a little bit before they really learn how to walk. I feel like the same thing is true with justice work, in the sense that you're not always going to say the right thing. I don't always say the right thing, and I should truly know better, but I don't always, right? Sometimes it's having that humility to say, I didn't say that right, but here's what I should have said. And so, you know that Facebook, ever since Trump's election, has been like a complete dumpster fire, right? But there's been times where I've seen people say, you know what, that information was not correct, my bad. And when I see people do that, I always congratulate that, because it takes a lot to say, hey, I was wrong. So I'm not going to tell you that it's easy, and I'm definitely not going to tell you that this work is comfortable. You are gonna be uncomfortable, and you're going to have to lean into and sit in that discomfort if you want to grow. So my 10-year-old, who it brings me kind of greater anxiety because he's very tall. I'm 5'9", and he's almost my height at 10, right? He'll come to me any given day and say, Mommy, my legs hurt. Mommy, my arms hurt. Those are growing pains. And so this big old tall boy, I still got to hold him and, you know, pet him and say, you know, it's going to be okay, and talk to his doctor and stuff like that. You're going to go through growing pains. And so I just want you to be ready for it, because ain't shit sweet. I'm just going to let you know, there is no participation trophy. There is no cookie for saying I'm anti-racist. Matter of fact, I want to be real, full disclosure, you're probably going to have some relatives, some colleagues, some people who don't agree with you. Because I see the pushback now. I see where I have friends and colleagues who post an article or make a statement or tell people they donated, and you see Uncle Bob jump in and say, I can't believe you're donating money to these looters. So I just want to let you know there's going to be some discord. It's not going to be harmonious. But I will say this much, when you fully committed to it, and especially for the long run, it will get easier. You will have a better idea of what to say and do. But when you first get started, it's going to be rough. I'm just letting you know it's going to be rough.
And I'll also share from a white perspective, I think one of the biggest changes for me is framing the feedback that I was getting as gifts. That when I was engaged, because I knew, and Black friends had told me, you realize people have been saying this about what you've been saying for a long time. No one has told you to your face. And so I think being able to get that feedback in seeing it as a gift instead of something to get defensive about has really made a big difference for me personally in doing the work.
Definitely. That feedback that you get. Now, keep in mind, I know my style is it's a little bit more abrupt. There are some Black folks who do this very gentle, very like loving, I want to soothe you type of a thing. I don't do that. I'm just letting you know, I don't do that. And then I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of the continuum, because I feel like there's like extremists who are like, just burn it all down. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm kind of riding somewhere at a happy medium. So just know that the feedback you get, it may not necessarily be the way that you want to get it. It may not speak to your love language, but trust and believe the feedback is real.
I have a question that just came in. It says, when there's an incident of racism by a student on campus, so for example, blackface, and Black students are understandably demanding transparency about consequences for that student, how can we show up for those students while balancing FERPA and other privacy laws?
So FERPA is a tricky thing. You know what I mean? In the sense of, you can't release exact details, you can't release names. Even though you got assholes who dox students, but that's another story. I would say that when it comes to your Black student organizations, and I have personally worked at campuses and worked in institutions where the Black students were a definite minority, and where they were not feeling supported, I would say one of the first things that you can do is hold space. And holding space doesn't really cost money, and it doesn't really harm you to give them that space. And a lot of times when it comes to them meeting and digesting what's going on, you don't even have to say anything. That's the crazy part. The students will step up and they will talk to each other, and they will organize with each other, and they will soothe each other. So if you're working at a campus where you have this kind of stuff going on, which is a lot of campuses, I would say that getting a physical space, because almost every staff has the ability to reserve a room or reserve an outside space or whatever it may be, call those Black students in and let them know, I have space for you, I have held space for you. And they can decide if they want to come and what they want to do about that. So I would say that when you are performative in your activist work, or when you try to force your solution on the students who've been harmed, a lot of times you can make the situation worse than it already was. And so for me, just listening, the basic tenet of just listening is usually like 80–90% of solving the problem. And these campuses where the students revolt and start holding sit-ins and start refusing to register for class and stuff, a lot of times they're there because nobody listened to them. So listen to them, deal with these students, the problematic students, deal with them in a way that is as transparent as it can be, still keeping FERPA, HIPAA, and all that good stuff in mind. But the last thing you want to do is not be transparent. Because for me as a Black person and for a lot of Black people, when you start hiding stuff, that means you're up to something. You might think I'm hiding stuff for the greater good, or I'm hiding stuff so that it doesn't turn more escalated, but you're gonna escalate it if you hide stuff. So transparency, listening, holding space, these are all free items that you can do.
Got another question, Ariel. How do we navigate the politics of a department or campus that does not want to outwardly name what is currently happening, especially with an overtly white leadership and you're a professional in a lower entry level position?
Okay, so that can be tricky. I've been entry level before. I'm a little bit more mid-level. I can say that now. I've been in the game since the early 2000s, you know? I would say that if you're a little bit more entry level and you don't feel like you have a voice, you don't feel like you have a seat at the table, a lot of campuses have a diversity, equity, and inclusion person, even if they're just there for a facade, keep it real. Talk with that person and look at the steps that they're taking and look at things that they're doing, because a lot of times those people are very receptive to have meetings, right? If you don't have a diversity, equity, inclusion person, a lot of campuses have an ombuds person or ombudswoman, ombudsman, whatever they call it at your campus. So that person is there to field concerns and suggestions, and they're supposed to do it anonymously. And so talking to that person about some things that you see going on, and especially when those things are violations of, you know, Title IX, violations of ADA, violations of anti-discriminatory laws and practices and stuff like that, that ombuds person is going to listen to you, and they are going to go talk to someone, because that ombuds person's real job is to keep the institution from getting sued. So there are people for you to talk to, even if you can't go straight to the top. I'm fortunate that in my role, I do get to spend a lot of time with my VP, my president, the board of trustees. I do get that visibility, right? And I understand not everybody has it, but if you don't have that, you have access to somebody. Even if your supervisor is not supportive, you have somebody outside of your department that is with the shits. Find that person and express your concern to them so you can see how you can work with them to be part of the cause.
Can I add the other power you have as an entry, and this is speaking from somebody who is a chief housing officer, is the students. Is that a lot of times, and even in director, sometimes I don't have the power, but if students are complaining, I'll ask them, so where have you gone with this? Like, who have you talked to about this? And I will kind of insinuate, if I don't know them very well. If I know them well, I might suggest, you know, maybe an email to the president. Don't tell them I told you that, might be helpful for you and maybe some of your friends to do. And I think that's where, unfortunately, and as hard as this is to hear, the students have a louder voice than a lot of our entry-level professionals on our college campuses. And so I think, but your power as an entry-level professional is you get to be in their ear and help them navigate some of these things. And that, to me, is where the power, when I was in the entry level, really came from. So I would say but helping the students get some of their needs. They would never think, what do you mean? I can just email the president? And you're like, what would stop you? It's on the website. There's the website. You can get their email right there. And if 10 people email the president, if 20 people email the president, then they're going to listen. Because I can tell you that the president, the people I've talked to who have not had those statements made, certainly those statements ended up getting made when the students started going, why is our campus being silent?
And you know what, Tyler, you raised a good point, because I've low-key but kind of high-key told students, like, if they were in my office pouring out and saying, I am struggling with this, I've been like, oh, did you know we have a grievance process? Like, oh, did you look at page 42 of the catalog? Like, I've done that. And so it's not outside of my job description, because if the student is in my office asking me, how can I deal with this? I'm remiss as a professional if I don't tell them at least a resource of the proper channels that they need to go through. So I'm not saying tell every student email the president every time they break a nail, but I'm saying that there is a process, there is a handbook, there is something that says when you have a concern or a grievance, these are the people you need to talk to. So just gently pushing the student that way so they can find that and they can be self-empowered and say, oh, well, now that I know there's a process, let me get involved with it. Sometimes that takes care of 100% of the problem.
There's a great question in here about someone who's a white-bodied licensed professional counselor and wants to make sure that they're creating space for their clients of color. So asking for words of guidance on how to best do that. Right now, they are usually just saying something like, I want to name the systemic racism and the trauma resulting from it, the violence, the injustice. I want to open this time up for you. Do you have any suggestions outside of that kind of guiding conversation?
I think that definitely the listening part and letting them vent in terms of what that trauma looks like. But to do it and not do it in a condescendingly way, I would also say that promoting self-care and promoting respite and promoting, you know, maybe you got to log off for social media for a little bit. I tell myself all the time, and don't listen to my own damn advice, but I tell myself all the time, stop reading the comment section. Like that in itself is self-care. Because there's things that I open up and it looks like good news. Like when I saw the article saying the other 3 officers who aided in the murder of George Floyd had been arrested, I said, great, that is awesome. And then I don't know why, I said, let me look at the comment section. And then I was like, oh Lord, just close it out. Just close Facebook out for today, leave it alone. So teaching them that, you know, racial battle fatigue is real and teaching them that they have to stop and take care of themselves, particularly Black women and women of color, because we will pick up everybody's fight. We will put everybody on our back. We will completely wear ourselves out to the bone trying to take care of everybody else and not take care of ourselves. So I just want to put that out there that you can tell the student they can put it down sometimes.
Ariel, any resources or examples of public institutions that have had genuinely productive, helpful responses to deal with hate speech on campus without violating First Amendment rights or censoring speech?
All right, so I'm gonna be real with you for a little bit. I can give you 10 examples off of the top of my head of what not to do, but I'm genuinely struggling to find an example of what to do. And so when it comes to what to do, I just recently saw a posting about a girl who she had been offered admissions to, it was like Arizona Christian University or something. And this girl just made some deplorable statements and she was just unapologetic about it. And she just felt like nobody was gonna do anything to her. She made the statement. Like the day after she made that statement, they released a statement and said, hey, we've seen these concerning comments from this admitted student. Just so you guys know, both her athletic scholarship and her admissions offer were rescinded, just so you know. And so they didn't have to get into specifics. They didn't have to repeat what she said. But literally, when it's a matter of days and you say, look, here's the action we took, that is the best way that you can go about handling the situation. But when you delay, when you don't make a statement, when you don't hold space, and probably the worst offender of all is that when the students do tell you what the problem is and you tell them it's all in their head or they're just imagining it, or you tell them something to the effect of, well, this is a diverse and inclusive campus. No, the fuck it's not. That's why they're talking to you. So you have to believe students the first time. You have to believe your staff the first time. When they tell you something or someone is problematic, listen to them. And don't brush the situation off because it's gonna be a powder keg. It's gonna come out later. They are gonna protest at campus and there won't be anything you can do about it. There's a professor at the University of North Carolina, I think it's Wilmington. And this professor says some outrageous stuff. And he's been doing it for like the last 20 years because after September 11th, he was all over social media saying really hateful Islamophobic stuff. And they didn't do anything then. And then he kept making statements about welfare and baby daddies and stuff in the meantime. And then now that this situation is where it's at with this Black uprising, he's making comments about, you know, looters and different stuff. But the thing is, it's not just a matter of just normal like opinion and him just saying, I don't like it. He's saying really racist dog whistle, like Ku Klux Klan level stuff. And the university is not dealing with it. And so it's just a matter of time before they either get sued or they have a protest or both. So that's an example of how not to deal with it, because this guy has tenure now. And if you would have dealt with him before he had tenure, you wouldn't be where you're at today. But they pushed it to the side. So that's why they're in the trouble that they're in.
I have another question for you. We have one that I will read it word for word for you. How can we approach our institutions who are tone deaf to the current events? For example, an initial statement was made that spoke out against racism, but then it was business as usual and they began promoting their fun campaign. It made the anti-racist statement feel like a checklist item. Do you have advice for younger professionals who maybe want to take a stand against that?
So if your campus has town halls, and I know some campuses do them like online with Zoom because of COVID-19. If you have departmental or division meetings, like if you have opportunities where you can kind of have a little bit of access to those people who make the decisions, who write the statements, I would try to give them some gentle feedback in that situation. I wouldn't say be as militant as I am, because granted, I understand I got permanent status, which is like the equivalent of tenure for a staff. So I can kind of say some crazy stuff. But when you're newer, I realize you may not necessarily be able to come out that strong and that loud. So when you have these meetings, sometimes you got to be like a little bit professional petty. And so you have the meeting and they open up for questions, and you can say something to the effect of, you know, in the statement that President such and such released, he talked about funds being set aside for reparations and reconciliation for students. What's the progress on that? Like a question as simple as that will let them know it is on your radar and other people's radar. See what I'm saying? So sometimes just even dropping the little seed to let them know, we see you, we're watching what you're doing. Unfortunately, some administrations, they only do right when people are looking. I hate to say it, but it's true. So letting them know that their choices are visible and they are a ripple effect, and they're going to cause problems with recruitment. They're going to cause problems with retention. They're going to cause, because that's the thing, some people only understand dollars. So if you tell them all the Black students are not going to show up in the fall because they don't feel safe here, and you give them numbers and say that's 1,000 students, and we're going to lose 3 kids from the basketball team who were top in the nation, and blah, 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 blah. When you start talking numbers, then they're like, oh crap, we got to do something. I'm going to take one more because I think I'm at 2 hours now. Sorry. I will, like I say, I will give some follow-up either on the event page or in the accountability group. So it's not to say I'm going to leave you high and dry, but I'll take one more question and then I got to go make dinner for my kids.
One second, I feel like I might have missed one in the hubbub, so let me look real quick.
No problem.
While I'm waiting for that person to resend me their question, so thank you. I'm just going to put in another plug. I'm going to put in the form that Tyler created for our accountability groups to follow up so that we can continue to do this work and have these conversations. So we haven't quite decided what that looks like, but FYI, we are super happy to have those conversations. So here's the question again. I'm in a grad program and my faculty chose to respond late, about a week late, to the murder of George Floyd. My faculty is open to feedback on how they can do better, but as a student, I feel like it's taboo to hold my faculty/program to faculty for reference accountable. I don't expect Ariel to necessarily have experience on that, but I would be open to hearing other experiences as well. So any advice that you have?
All right, for the record, shout out to my cohort. They're in this webinar. My doctoral cohort is here. And I could honestly get off the mic and let them tell it. My faculty already know when I'm coming. They already know. So yes, you indeed 100% can hold your faculty accountable. Especially as much money as people pay to do these master's and doctor programs, to work in higher ed where they don't even make enough to even cover those student loan payments. You're allowed to say something. So I'm not saying that, you know, you get your faculty in front of everybody and say, hey, dumbass, do better. I'm not saying do that. But I'm saying that during office hours or during an open forum, you can tell them that this may not have been the way to go about that. Because people have to remember that even though faculty have been in the field and faculty have sometimes been on the front lines, keep it real, there's faculty who have been removed from that for 20, 30 years. So being a faculty member has allowed them to be shielded. And so those real cutting edge situations that are going on, they don't exist. You know what I mean? They don't exist for them because they're not out in the field like that anymore. They are doing their research, they are teaching their classes, they are grading papers, but they are not on the front lines because that's not what they're called to do at that level in their profession. So giving them some feedback, obviously in a respectful way, but letting them know that this situation could have been handled better by an XYZ, you almost have an obligation to do that. And in my particular cohort of my program, there are but 2 Black people. It's me and it's one guy. And so we laugh and joke, but at the same time, we have to obviously be the Black voice sometimes because it's just us. And so if you're a white colleague, shout out to my cohort, a lot of times they've seen where I'm uncomfortable with something and I don't even have to say anything. They'll jump in and say, well, you know, maybe should we be doing this? Should we do something else? So don't think at all that you can't hold faculty accountable. You absolutely can. There's a way to go about doing it, but trust, you can 100% hold faculty accountable. All right, and I think that was all of our questions, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so I was happy to spend this time with all of you. Tyler and Margy, you guys are the real MVPs in the sense of I'm like technologically underdeveloped. I talk a lot, but you see me struggling with the Vimo and everything. So I appreciate you two. I appreciate everybody's patience with my whole cut fiber optics cable situation. My succulents in my office have died though. They are dead, like all the way dead. Yeah, but thank you. Thank you to everybody who donated to the Ariel Eyebrow Fund. Thank you to everybody who got something out of the dialogue today. And again, whatever space we set up, I am going to still be there to still curate and to still give input. I'm not going to do the work for you. I'm gonna let you know that I'm not, but I'm still going to give you tools because I still want you guys to continue this work. Just like when Nipsey Hussle died, they said the marathon continues. In this case, the marathon continues. All right.
Thank you so much, Ariel. This has been beyond anything any of us deserve, so thank you.
Aw, much
Does
love
everybody
to you
want to,
guys.
can everybody unmute and say, they can all say thank you at the same time? We can do a free for all. I think people have been very,
Student affairs.
if people want to unmute, can they unmute themselves or no?
I think I did like a mute all. Let me like
You're
unmute. Let me see if I can like.
Thank you.
There you go.
Good job, girlfriend.
Bye-bye, Ariel.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.